This is part 1 of lecture 10 on the cardiovascular system in terms of human physiology. This information can be found in chapter 18 of your textbook on pages 671 to 702. To understand physiology of the cardiovascular system, you also need to understand the anatomy. So there will be some overlap between this course and your anatomy course. In some ways, though, this is beneficial because you can learn one set of material for two different courses. With the heart, you have both the pulmonary and the systemic circuits. The heart is a transport system which transports blood throughout the human body. And basically, even though it is one organ, in reality, it is two side-by-side pumps. The right side of the heart, and when we refer to the right side, we mean you as a person, your right side, not as you're looking at the person. The right side receives oxygen-poor blood from the tissues. It then pumps the blood to the lungs to dispose of carbon dioxide and pick up more oxygen, and this is via the pulmonary circuit. The left side receives oxygen-rich blood from the lungs and then pumps blood to the body tissues via the systemic circuit. The receiving chambers of the heart are the right atrium and the left atrium. The right atrium receives blood returning from the systemic circuit, or from the body. The left atrium receives blood returning from the pulmonary circuit, or from the lungs. The pumping chambers of the heart are the right ventricle and the left ventricle. The right ventricle pumps blood through the pulmonary circuit, or through the lungs, and the left ventricle pumps blood through the systemic circuit, or through the body. The human heart is approximately the size of a closed fist and weighs less than 1 pound. There are 3 layers of heart wall: the epicardium, the myocardium, and the cardiac skeleton. The epicardium is a visceral layer of serous pericardium, or connective tissue. The myocardium is circular or spiral bundles of contractile cardiac muscle cells. The cardiac skeleton consists of crisscrossing, interlacing layer of connective tissue and anchors the cardiac muscle fibers. It also supports the great vessels and valves and limits the spread of action potentials to specific pathways. This figure, 18.1, demonstrates the flow of blood through the heart, as it is a double pump. Up here, we can see that the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava are the transport vessels for blood to the right atrium. Blood flows into the right atrium, and then the tricuspid valve opens up and blood flows into the right ventricle. The first 2/3 of blood will flow naturally in, with the last third of blood being given a kick from contraction of the right atrium to enter the right ventricle. The right ventricle will then contract and push blood into the pulmonary trunk on its way to the lungs. Notice at the top of this diagram that the blood is demonstrated or illustrated in blue to demonstrate that it is oxygen-poor blood. The blood then flows through the pulmonary capillaries, or the capillaries of the lung, and is returned via the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. With the left atrium, the mitral or bicuspid valve will open up so that blood can flow into the left ventricle. Again, approximately 2/3 of the blood flows naturally in, with the last third being given a kick into the left ventricle with contraction of the left atrium. The left ventricle will then contract and push the blood through the aorta and to the body via the systemic capillaries, and then the cycle repeats itself. A great way to learn the anatomy of the cardiovascular system, and of the heart specifically, is to list the structures that blood flows through as it passes through the heart. That is, superior and inferior vena cava to the right atrium past the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle past the pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk, and so forth and so on. Equal volumes of blood are pumped to the pulmonary and systemic circuits. The pulmonary circuit is a short, low-pressure circulation system, whereas the systemic circuit is a long, high-friction circulation and high pressure. In terms of the anatomy, the left ventricle walls are 3 times thicker than the right ventricle wall, and this is due to the fact that the left ventricle pumps with greater pressure. Since the heart is made up of muscle tissue, it itself requires blood circulation and oxygen and nutrients. And this is where the coronary circulation comes in. The coronary circulation is basically functional blood supply to the heart muscle, and it is the shortest circulation in the body. This blood is delivered when the heart is relaxed. That is, the heart contracts, and then as it relaxes in preparation for the next contraction, blood will flow through the coronary circulation. The left ventricle receives most of the coronary blood supply. You have both left and right coronary arteries, which we can see here and here, branching off the aorta, or the base of the aorta, which will supply arterial blood to the heart. It encircles the heart in the coronary sulcus. The branching of the coronary arteries will vary in individuals, but the heart receives about 1/20 of the body's blood supply. The coronary veins then collect blood from the capillary beds to return it to the right atrium. In terms of microscopic anatomy, cardiac muscle cells are striated, short, branched, fat, and interconnected. There will be one central nucleus per cell, possibly two. They have numerous large mitochondria that account for 25 to 35% of the cell volume, and this is what gives resistance to fatigue for the heart tissue. The rest of the volume are composed of sarcomeres. The T-tubules are wider than in skeletal muscle cells, but less numerous, and sarcoplasmic reticulum is simpler than in skeletal muscle. There are no triads. Cardiac muscle cells also possess intercalated discs. These are connecting junctions between cardiac cells that contain desmosomes, gap junctions. Desmosomes hold the cells together and prevent the cells from separating during contraction. Gap junctions allow ions to pass from cell to cell, and basically electrically couple adjacent cells. The gap junctions allow the heart to be in a functional syncytium, a single coordinated contraction. The intercellular space between the cells has connective tissue matrix, known as endomyosin, that contains numerous capillaries, and connects cardiac muscle to cardiac skeleton, which gives the cells something to pull against when they contract. This table gives a description of the difference between skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle. In terms of structure, gap junctions between cells, whether the muscles contract as a unit or not, the presence and characteristics of T-tubules, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the source of calcium for contraction, whether calcium binds to a troponin or not, if there are pacemaker cells present or not, if tetanus is possible or not, and the primary supply of ATP. And this is the conclusion of Part 1 of Lecture 10 on cardiovascular physiology.